When my husband Kevin bought himself an expensive smartwatch for his birthday, I thought it was just another midlife crisis purchase. 3 months later, when I accidentally discovered his heart rate spiked to 180 BPM every Tuesday and Thursday at exactly 2 p.m. times when he claimed to be sitting in boring client meetings, I realized that little device on his wrist was about to become the most honest witness to his lies. By the time I was done using his own technology against him, that watch had recorded every betrayal, every secret location, and every racing heartbeat that ultimately cost him everything he thought he could hide from me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Lisa Martinez, and until 3 months ago I believed I was living the life I'd always dreamed of. Kevin and I had been married for 9 years, and we built what everyone in our Riverside neighborhood considered the perfect family. Our 4-bedroom house in Willowbrook Estates sat on a quiet cul-de-sac where kids rode bikes until sunset, and neighbors still brought casseroles when someone had surgery. Our daughter Sophia, 7 years old with Kevin's dark eyes and my stubborn streak, was thriving in 2nd grade at Oakwood Elementary. Tyler, our 5-year-old son, had just started kindergarten and came home every day bursting with stories about his new friends and the class pet hamster named Miss Whiskers. Kevin worked as a regional sales manager for TechFlow Solutions, a software company with offices scattered across the West Coast. His territory covered everything from San Diego to Phoenix, which meant he traveled frequently but earned enough for me to work part-time as a freelance graphic designer. It was the perfect arrangement. I could be present for school pickup and soccer practice, while still maintaining my creative career designing logos and marketing materials for local businesses. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable, secure, and deeply embedded in the kind of suburban community where everyone knew each other's kids and dogs by name. Our marriage had weathered the typical storms, sleepless nights with newborns, financial stress during Kevin's early career years, the exhaustion that comes with balancing 2 careers and 2 small children. But we'd emerged stronger, more connected, with the easy intimacy that develops between couples who figured out how to be teammates rather than competitors. Kevin was the kind of husband who still opened car doors, who remembered to pick up my favorite coffee on Sunday mornings, who could make me laugh until my sides hurt with his spot-on impressions of our more eccentric neighbors. Every morning, Kevin would kiss me goodbye at exactly 7:15, his hair still damp from the shower, his cologne lingering in the kitchen long after his Honda Accord disappeared around the corner. He'd text me updates throughout his day, stuck in traffic on the 91 grabbing lunch between client meetings, running late but should be home by 6. Our evening routine was beautifully predictable. Homework supervision while I prepared dinner, family time in the living room where we'd watch Sophia practice her piano lessons, and Tyler build increasingly elaborate Lego constructions, bedtime stories that Kevin read in different voices for each character. Weekends were our sanctuary. Saturday mornings meant pancakes and cartoons, followed by trips to the Grove Shopping Center or Meridian Fitness Center where Kevin would work out while the kids and I used the family pool. Sunday evenings were reserved for Giuseppe's Italian restaurant, our traditional family dinner spot where Sophia always ordered chicken parmesan and Tyler insisted on plain spaghetti with butter. The servers knew us by name, always bringing extra breadsticks and keeping Tyler's orange juice refilled without being asked. In our social circle, other parents from school, neighbors, Kevin's colleagues from TechFlow, we were often held up as relationship goals. Lisa and Kevin just make it look so easy, friends would say at backyard barbecues and birthday parties. They're still so in love after all these years. Kevin would wrap his arm around my waist during these conversations, pulling me close with the easy affection of a man who knew he was exactly where he belonged. I'd lean into his warmth, inhaling the familiar scent of his aftershave, feeling grateful for the stability we'd created together. The smartwatch entered our lives in December, Kevin's 38th birthday gift to himself. The Apex Fit Pro was sleek and expensive, all black titanium and sapphire crystal, the kind of device that screamed serious athlete even though Kevin's most strenuous regular exercise was our Saturday morning walks around the neighborhood. He'd been talking about wanting to get more serious about fitness, claiming that sitting in client meetings and driving between cities was making him feel older than his years. I'll admit I rolled my eyes a little when he showed me all the features: GPS tracking for runs he'd never taken, heart rate monitoring for workouts he'd never done, sleep analysis for a man who fell asleep within minutes of his head hitting the pillow. But Kevin was genuinely excited about it, spending his first evening with the watch exploring every menu and setting, syncing it with his phone, downloading fitness apps he swore he'd actually use this time. Those first few weeks, the watch seemed to motivate him exactly as advertised. He started taking morning walks, checking his steps throughout the day, even suggesting we park farther away at the mall to increase our daily activity. He'd show me his heart rate data over dinner, proud of maintaining a steady 72 beats per minute during his afternoon presentations, laughing about how the watch had detected stress spikes during particularly difficult client calls. The device became an extension of him in a way I'd never seen Kevin adopt any previous gadget. His phone might be forgotten on the kitchen counter or left charging in the bedroom, but the watch never left his wrist. He wore it to bed, checking his sleep quality scores each morning. He wore it in the shower, since it was waterproof up to 50 meters. He even wore it to Giuseppe's on Sunday nights, occasionally glancing down to check his heart rate or step count while Sophia told us about her week at school. I found his dedication to the watch endearing rather than concerning. Kevin had always been someone who committed fully to his interests, whether it was the year he decided to learn guitar or the summer he became obsessed with grilling the perfect steak. The watch seemed like a positive influence, encouraging him to think more about his health and fitness. When he announced he was planning to start working out at Meridian Fitness Center during his lunch breaks, I was supportive and proud. The first few months of the new year brought their usual challenges. Sophia caught a stomach bug that kept her home from school for a week. Tyler decided he was afraid of the dark and started appearing in our bedroom every night around 2 a.m., and I was juggling 3 major design projects with impossible deadlines. Kevin seemed busier than usual too, claiming that TechFlow was expanding their client base, and everyone was being pushed to increase their sales numbers. His schedule became more unpredictable during this time. Client meetings that used to end by 5 started running until 6 or 7. The business trips that had once been overnight affairs suddenly required extended stays. Kevin explained that the new clients were more demanding, requiring multiple follow-up meetings and longer relationship-building processes. It made sense. The tech industry was competitive, and Kevin had always been willing to go the extra mile to secure important contracts. What I didn't realize until much later was that his precious smartwatch was documenting every moment of this changing pattern. Every irregular heartbeat, every unexpected location, every minute of activity that didn't match the story he was telling me was being recorded with digital precision. The same device he'd bought to monitor his health was quietly creating an unalterable record of his deception. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday in March. Sophia had a dentist appointment after school. Tyler's class was having their weekly library visit, and I had a conference call with a potential client at 10 a.m. Kevin left for work at his usual time, mentioning that he had back-to-back meetings until late afternoon, and might not be reachable for most of the day. He kissed me goodbye, grabbed his travel mug of coffee and reminded me that he loved me before heading out to his car. Around 11:30, while I was reviewing design concepts for a local restaurant's rebranding project, Kevin's watch started sending notifications to my phone. This wasn't unusual when he'd first set up the device. He'd accidentally synced it to my phone as well as his own, and we'd never bothered to change the settings, since I occasionally found it useful to know if he was okay during long drives between cities. The first notification was a fitness alert congratulating Kevin on reaching his daily step goal, normal enough though it was early in the day for him to have walked that much during indoor meetings. The second notification, arriving 20 minutes later, showed his heart rate had elevated to 104 beats per minute, during what the app labeled as an intense workout session. I stared at my phone screen, confused. Kevin had mentioned grabbing lunch at his office building's cafeteria, not going to the gym. Maybe he'd decided to take a walking meeting with a client, or perhaps he'd squeezed in a quick workout between appointments. The notification seemed odd but not alarming, until I realized that 104.5 BPM was significantly higher than any heart rate the watch had recorded during Kevin's previous actual workouts. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the full Apex Fit app on my phone. What I found there made my stomach drop. According to the GPS tracking, Kevin wasn't at his office building in downtown Riverside. The little blue dot representing his location was pulsing from inside Marina Bay Hotel, a luxury establishment, 15 minutes from his office, that we'd driven past countless times, but never had reason to visit. I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe TechFlow was hosting a client lunch at the hotel's restaurant. Maybe Kevin's company was considering the venue for their annual conference. Maybe the GPS was malfunctioning, showing incorrect location data due to poor satellite reception in downtown building. I forced myself to close the app and return to my work, but concentration proved impossible. Every few minutes, I found myself checking the watch data again. Kevin's heart rate remained elevated, fluctuating between 130 and 160 BPM for exactly 90 minutes. His location never moved from the hotel. According to the activity tracker, he was engaged in what the algorithm classified as vigorous physical exercise, burning calories at a rate consistent with high-intensity interval training. When the notifications finally stopped and Kevin's vitals returned to normal, I felt a mixture of relief and growing unease. Whatever had happened at Marina Bay Hotel was over, but the questions multiplied in my mind like cancer cells. Why had Kevin lied about his lunch plan? Why was his heart racing for an hour and a half in a hotel? Why had he never mentioned any business connection to Marina Bay? That evening, Kevin returned home at his usual time, cheerful and relaxed. He helped Tyler with his dinosaur puzzle while I finished preparing dinner, asked Sophia about her math homework, complimented me on the new chicken recipe I was trying. His behavior was perfectly normal, affectionate without being suspiciously over-attentive. When I casually asked about his day, he described a series of meetings with existing clients, mentioned grabbing a sandwich at his desk, complained mildly about traffic on the drive home. No mention of Marina Bay Hotel. No explanation for the 90 minutes of elevated heart rate. No acknowledgement that anything about his day had been different from the routine business schedule he'd described that morning. I said nothing about the watch notifications, but as we went through our evening routine, dinner, homework supervision, bedtime stories, I found myself studying Kevin's face for signs of deception. Did his smile seem forced? Was he avoiding eye contact? Had he always checked his phone this frequently during family time? The man sitting across from me at the dinner table looked exactly like the husband I'd loved for 9 years, but the data from his own smartwatch suggested he was living a life I knew nothing about. That night, after Kevin fell asleep beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and trying to construct. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Innocent explanations for what I'd discovered. Perhaps Kevin's phone had synced incorrectly with his watch, creating false location data. Perhaps he'd loaned the watch to a colleague who'd gone to the hotel for a legitimate business meeting. Perhaps the heart rate spikes were caused by a medical issue Kevin hadn't mentioned. Some kind of arrhythmia triggered by stress or caffeine. But even as I cycled through these possibilities, a deeper part of my mind was recognizing patterns I'd previously dismissed. Kevin's increased travel schedule, which had begun shortly after Christmas, his new habit of showering immediately upon returning home from work, claiming he felt sweaty and grimy after long days in stuffy conference rooms, the way he'd started placing his phone face down during dinner, something he'd never done in all our years together. His recent suggestion that we should spend less money on date nights, since he was trying to increase his savings contributions at work. Individual behaviors that had seemed like minor changes in routine suddenly formed a constellation of deception when viewed alongside the smartwatch data. Kevin wasn't just lying about Tuesday afternoon at Marina Bay Hotel. He was constructing an elaborate alternative reality to hide activities that required elevated heart rates, unexplained locations, and careful financial management. The next morning, Kevin left for work with the same routine kiss and coffee mug, the same cheerful reminder that he loved me. But this time I was watching his smartwatch instead of his face, noting how the device that had become such an integral part of his identity was about to become the instrument of his destruction. He had no idea that every lie he told would be contradicted by data from his own wrist, every deception documented with the precision that only technology could provide. As his Honda Accord disappeared around the corner of our quiet cul-de-sac, I was already planning how to use his own digital obsession to uncover the truth he thought he could hide from me forever. The following Thursday arrived with the kind of crisp morning sunshine that made Riverside feel like a postcard of California suburban perfection. I dropped Sophia off at school early for her science fair setup, watched Tyler climb aboard the bright yellow bus with his Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles backpack, and settled into my home office with a steaming cup of coffee and my laptop. My newest client, a boutique bakery in Corona, needed their logo redesigned before their grand reopening next month, and I was determined to focus entirely on color palettes and typography until Kevin's workday ended. That determination lasted exactly 43 minutes. At 9:17 a.m., Kevin's smartwatch sent its first notification of the day to my phone. According to the GPS tracker, he'd arrived at TechFlow's downtown office right on schedule. His heart rate was a steady 74 beats per minute, perfectly normal for someone settling into morning emails and coffee. I glanced at the notification and tried to return my attention to the bakery's brand identity, telling myself that monitoring Kevin's biometric data was an invasion of privacy that would only feed my growing paranoia. By 10:30, I'd managed to complete preliminary sketches for 3 different logo concepts, each incorporating the warm artisanal aesthetic the bakery owner had requested. The work felt good, requiring the kind of focused creativity that usually helped clear my mind of domestic work. When Kevin's watch buzzed my phone again at 10:45, I almost ignored it entirely. The notification showed Kevin's heart rate climbing to 95 beats per minute, elevated but not dramatically. Perhaps he was walking between floors for a meeting, or dealing with a stressful client call. The location data confirmed he was still at TechFlow's office building, exactly where he was supposed to be. I reminded myself that occasional heart rate spikes were perfectly normal throughout the day, especially for someone whose job involved managing difficult clients and hitting quarterly sales targets. But something compelled me to check the historical data from Tuesday's unexplained hotel visit, and what I discovered made my hands tremble as I scrolled through the timestamp. Kevin's heart rate pattern from Marina Bay Hotel hadn't been a steady elevation during 90 minutes of supposed exercise. Instead, the data showed distinct peaks and valleys, periods of intense activity followed by brief recoveries, then building intensity again. It looked nothing like any workout routine Kevin had ever followed at Meridian Fitness Center. More troubling was the timing. Kevin's watch recorded the beginning of elevated activity at exactly 2:14 p.m. on Tuesday, reaching maximum intensity between 2:30 and 3:45, then gradually returning to baseline by 4:15. The pattern was too precise to be coincidental, too structured to be a medical emergency, too intimate to be any kind of business meeting I could imagine. I found myself opening Kevin's calendar on our shared iCloud account, searching for any mention of Marina Bay Hotel or meetings that might explain Tuesday's discrepancy. His schedule showed back-to-back client appointments from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m., all taking place at TechFlow's office or various corporate locations around Riverside. No hotels, no gaps that would allow for unexplained 90-minute absences, no acknowledgement that his actual whereabouts had deviated from the carefully documented business schedule. The realization hit me like cold water in the face. Kevin wasn't just lying about where he'd been on Tuesday afternoon, he was maintaining detailed false records, constructing an elaborate paper trail designed to hide activities that required him to be somewhere else entirely. This wasn't absent-minded confusion or innocent miscommunication. This was calculated deception on a scale that required significant planning and commitment. My coffee grew cold as I continued examining the smartwatch data, searching for other inconsistencies I might have missed. The previous Thursday showed a similar pattern: heart rate elevation at Marina Bay Hotel from 2:20 until 4:10 p.m., while Kevin's calendar indicated client meetings at TechFlow all afternoon. The Thursday before that revealed the same location, the same timing, the same cardiovascular signature of intense physical activity during hours when Kevin claimed to be sitting in conference rooms, discussing software solutions. 3 consecutive Thursdays, the same hotel, the same time window, the same lies. I grabbed my phone and opened the Marina Bay Hotel website, studying their amenities and services for any legitimate business connection Kevin might have failed to mention. The hotel featured an upscale restaurant, a small conference center, a spa and 200 guest rooms, decorated in what their marketing copy described as modern luxury, with touches of old-world charm. Their restaurant specialized in contemporary American cuisine with an emphasis on locally sourced ingredients. Their conference facilities could accommodate groups from 10 to 50 people for corporate events and business meetings. Perhaps Kevin's company was considering Marina Bay for their quarterly sales meeting. Perhaps TechFlow was courting a client who preferred to conduct business in hotel conference rooms rather than traditional office settings. Perhaps Kevin was attending training sessions or networking events that he'd simply forgotten to mention during our evening conversations about work. But even as I constructed these innocent explanations, my designer's eye was catching details that contradicted them. Marina Bay's conference center was booked solid through the end of April with weddings, retirement parties and anniversary celebrations. Their restaurant required reservations weeks in advance for parties larger than 2 people. Their business meeting packages started at $400 per session, hardly the kind of expense TechFlow would approve for routine client meetings, when they maintained perfectly adequate conference facilities in their own downtown office. More significantly, Marina Bay's amenities included a day spa offering couples massage packages, private meditation rooms, and therapeutic treatments designed for intimate relaxation. Their guest room descriptions emphasized romantic atmospheres, king-size beds with premium linens, and stunning views of the riverside hills that were perfect for special occasions and memorable getaways. My hands were definitely shaking now as I scrolled through Kevin's fitness data for the past 3 months, looking for a pattern I desperately hoped wouldn't be there. January showed occasional Tuesday and Thursday anomalies, heart rate elevations during business hours that lasted 30 to 60 minutes. February revealed more frequent incidents, with Kevin's watch recording intense activity at various locations around Riverside during times when his calendar indicated office meetings. March told a different story entirely. Every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 4 weeks, Kevin's smartwatch documented identical visits to Marina Bay Hotel, 2 to 4 p.m., elevated heart rate consistent with vigorous physical activity, GPS coordinates that never varied by more than a few feet. The pattern was so precise it could have been programmed into his schedule, so consistent it suggested a standing appointment that had become as routine as our Sunday dinners at Giuseppe. I closed my laptop and walked to the kitchen window overlooking our backyard where the swing set Kevin had assembled for Sophia's 5th birthday still stood beneath the mature oak tree we'd chosen this house for. Tyler's Sandock sat in the corner near the fence, surrounded by the toy trucks and dinosaur figures he'd left scattered after yesterday's archaeological expedition. Everything looked exactly as it should in our carefully maintained suburban paradise, yet the data on my phone suggested that the man who'd helped create this peaceful domestic scene was living an entirely separate life 2 afternoons every week. The sound of my phone buzzing brought me back to the present moment. Another notification from Kevin's smartwatch time-stamped 11:47 a.m., showing his heart rate had jumped to 112 beats per minute. Still at TechFlow's office according to the GPS, but exhibiting physiological stress levels that seemed inconsistent with his usual morning routine of emails and conference calls. I opened the full app again, studying Kevin's real-time biometric data with the uncomfortable realization that I was essentially spying on my husband's body without his knowledge or consent. His heart rate continued climbing, 120, 135, 148 beats per minute. The activity tracker registered increasing movement, classifying his current state as moderate to intense exercise despite his supposed location in a downtown office building. Then, at exactly 12:15 p.m., Kevin's GPS location changed. The little blue dot representing his position moved from TechFlow's address to a route heading west toward the foothills above Riverside. I watched in real time as the dot traced a path along Highway, then turned north on a series of residential streets I recognized as leading toward Corona Hills, an upscale neighborhood where houses started at $800,000 and featured the kind of architectural details that appeared in Home Design magazine. Kevin's heart rate remained elevated throughout the 20-minute drive, fluctuating between 120 and 140 beats per minute. When the GPS finally stopped moving, the blue dot was pulsing from inside a residential address in Corona Hills that I didn't recognize. According to the smartwatch, Kevin had arrived at 247 Meadowbrook Lane at 12:36 p.m. I immediately opened Google Maps and searched for the address, using Street View to examine the house where my husband was currently spending his lunch hour. The property was stunning, a contemporary two-story home with clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows and a meticulously landscaped front yard featuring drought-resistant plants and decorative rock. The driveway held a silver BMW sedan that I'd never seen before, and the house itself looked like something from an upscale real estate magazine rather than the kind of place Kevin would visit for legitimate business purposes. My heart was pounding now, matching the elevated rhythm Kevin's watch had been recording for the past hour. I grabbed my keys from the kitchen counter, then stopped myself. What exactly was I planning to do? Drive to Corona Hills and confront Kevin at a stranger's house? Demand explanations for activities I'd discovered through digital surveillance that he didn't even know I was conducting? Instead, I called Sandra Kim, my closest friend since we'd met at Sophia's preschool orientation 4 years ago. Sandra worked as a loan officer at Riverside Credit Union, and possessed the kind of practical wisdom that came from listening to people's financial confessions all day. If anyone could help me process what I was discovering about Kevin's secret activities, it would be Sandra. She answered on the second ring, probably expecting a routine conversation about weekend plans or school fundraising committees. Instead, I launched into a detailed explanation of the smartwatch data, the Marina Bay Hotel visits, and Kevin's current location at an unknown address in Corona Hill. Sandra listened without interruption until I'd finished describing the past week's worth of digital revelations. "Lisa," she said finally, her voice carrying the gentle firmness of someone delivering news that no one wanted to hear. "You know what this sounds like, right?" I did know, but hearing the words spoken aloud made them real in a way that studying data on my phone had not. Kevin was having an affair. The elevated heart rates, the secret locations, the carefully maintained false calendar entries, everything pointed to a relationship he was conducting 2 afternoons every week with someone who lived in a beautiful house in Corona Hills and drove a silver BMW. "What should I do?" I asked Sandra, surprising myself with how calm my voice sounded despite the chaos unfolding in my chest. "Document everything," she replied immediately. "Screenshot all the data, save the GPS coordinates, keep records of every lie and every inconsistency. If this is what I think it is, you're going to need evidence for divorce proceedings. And Lisa, don't confront him yet, not until you know exactly what you're dealing with and have a plan for protecting yourself and the kid." After hanging up with Sandra, I spent the next 2 hours creating a detailed digital file of Kevin's smartwatch data, screenshots of his heart rate patterns during hotel visits, GPS coordinates for every suspicious location, timestamps showing the discrepancies between his stated schedule and his actual activity. I organized everything by date and time, creating the kind of systematic documentation that would stand up to legal scrutiny. Kevin's watch showed him leaving the Corona Hills address at 3:42 p.m., his heart rate gradually returning to normal as he drove back toward downtown Riverside. By 4:15, he was back at TechFlow's office, his biometric data indicating the calm, steady rhythm of someone settling into afternoon emails after a satisfying lunch break. When Kevin arrived home that evening at 6:23 p.m., I was helping Tyler practice writing his name while Sophia finished her social studies homework at the kitchen table. He greeted us with his usual enthusiasm, kissing my cheek and asking about everyone's day in the warm, attentive tone that had always made me feel cherished and prioritized. "How was your lunch?" I asked casually while he hung his jacket in the hall closet. "Oh, just grabbed a sandwich at my desk," Kevin replied without missing a beat. "Had to catch up on paperwork after this morning's client presentations. Nothing exciting." He moved through our evening routine with perfect naturalness, helping Tyler sound out difficult words, listening to Sophia practice her piano lesson,
complimenting my decision to try a new recipe for dinner. His behavior was affectionate without being suspiciously over-attentive, engaged without seeming like he was overcompensating for guilt.
If I hadn't seen the smartwatch data with my own eyes, I would have had no reason to question his account of a routine workday followed by a typical family evening. But I had seen the data. I knew he'd spent 2 hours at a stranger's house in Corona Hills, experiencing the kind of elevated heart rate that suggested intense physical activity. I knew he'd constructed an elaborate lie about grabbing a sandwich at his desk, complete with details about paperwork and client presentations that may or may not have actually occurred. As we cleaned up after dinner and prepared the kids for bedtime, I found myself studying Kevin's face for signs of deception or guilt. Did his smile seem forced when he laughed at Tyler's jokes? Was he avoiding eye contact when he told Sophia about his day? Had he always been this good at compartmentalizing his emotions? Or was I only now noticing his ability to switch seamlessly between whatever life he was living during the day and the devoted family man who read bedtime stories with different voices for each character? That night, after Kevin fell asleep beside me with his smartwatch glowing softly on the nightstand, I lay awake calculating how long this had been going on and trying to understand how I'd missed the signs. 3 months of Marina Bay hotel visits, at least 6 weeks of trips to the Corona Hills house, possibly longer periods of deception that predated my accidental discovery of the watch notifications. How many lies had Kevin told me about client meetings and conference calls? How many evening conversations about his workday had been elaborate fictions designed to hide activities I was only beginning to understand? How many times had he kissed me goodbye in the morning, knowing he was planning to spend the afternoon with someone else, then returned home to help with homework and bedtime routines as if nothing had changed? The man sleeping peacefully beside me looked exactly like the husband I'd loved for 9 years, but the data from his own smartwatch revealed a stranger who was capable of sustained, systematic deception on a level I'd never imagined possible. Kevin wasn't just hiding an affair, he was living a completely parallel life while maintaining the fiction that nothing about our marriage had changed. Part 3. The undeniable proof. Friday morning arrived with the kind of overcast sky that matched my emotional state perfectly. Kevin followed his usual routine: shower, coffee, goodbye kiss, reminder that he loved me. But this time I was armed with questions I couldn't ask and knowledge he didn't know I possessed. His smartwatch remained on the nightstand while he showered, charging for another day of documenting activities he believed would remain secret forever. I waited until his Honda Accord disappeared around the corner before grabbing my laptop and opening the detailed surveillance file I'd created the previous afternoon. Today was Friday, which according to the pattern I'd discovered should be a normal workday, with Kevin remaining at TechFlow's office for legitimate business activity. If my growing suspicions were correct, Tuesdays and Thursdays were reserved for his secret life while the other weekdays maintained the appearance of routine professional responsibilities. But as I organized my documentation and prepared to continue my investigation, a new notification from Kevin's smartwatch made my stomach clench with recognition. 9:47 a.m., heart rate elevated to 115 beats per minute. Location: TechFlow's downtown office. Activity level: moderate exercise. This was different from the Tuesday and Thursday pattern. Kevin's cardiovascular response was building earlier in the day, suggesting either that his secret activities had expanded beyond their previous schedule, or that something about Friday was causing him unusual stress. I opened the real-time tracking app and watched as Kevin's heart rate continued climbing throughout the morning, reaching 135 beats per minute by 10:15. Then at exactly 11:23 a.m., Kevin's GPS location changed again. The familiar blue dot began moving west from downtown Riverside, following the same route I'd watched him take yesterday toward Corona Hills. This time, however, his destination wasn't the residential address on Meadowbrook Lane. Instead, the GPS tracker showed Kevin pulling into the parking lot of Meridian Fitness Center, the upscale gym where our family had held a membership for the past 3 years. My first reaction was relief. Kevin was actually at the gym, engaging in the kind of physical activity that would naturally explain his elevated heart rate and GPS movement. Perhaps the previous day's visit to Corona Hills had been legitimate business after all, and I'd been constructing elaborate conspiracy theories based on circumstantial evidence and my own growing paranoia about our marriage. But relief transformed into confusion as I continued monitoring the data. Kevin's heart rate patterns at Meridian Fitness Center looked nothing like his previous gym session. Instead of the varied intervals and recovery periods typical of cardiovascular exercise, his smartwatch recorded sustained elevation between 140 and 160 beats per minute for 45 consecutive minutes. No rest periods, no cool-down phases, no gradual build-up that would indicate warm-up activities. More puzzling was the specific location data within the gym facility. Kevin's GPS coordinates weren't moving between different areas of the building as they would if he were transitioning from cardio equipment to weight machines to stretching area. Instead, the blue dot remained stationary in one specific section of Meridian Fitness Center for the entire duration of his visit. I opened Meridian's website and studied their facility map, trying to determine which area of the gym corresponded to Kevin's static GPS position. The coordinates placed him in the southeast corner of the building, far from the main workout floor with its rows of treadmills and weight equipment. According to the facility map, that section of the building housed private training rooms, massage therapy suites, and what the website described as executive relaxation areas available for premium members who required privacy during their fitness routine. Something about this discovery felt significant, though I couldn't immediately articulate why. Kevin had never mentioned using private training facilities at Meridian, and our standard family membership didn't include access to the premium areas where his GPS was indicating he'd spent the past hour. When we'd toured the gym before joining 3 years ago, the sales representative had shown us the private suites, but explained they required separate membership fees that we deemed unnecessary for our fitness goals. I called Meridian Fitness Center directly, speaking with a cheerful receptionist who confirmed that access to the private training rooms and relaxation suites required either premium membership status or guest passes purchased by existing premium members. When I asked whether Kevin Martinez held premium membership privileges, the receptionist checked their records and confirmed that our family account was limited to standard access only. However, she added helpfully, members can bring guests to the premium areas if they're accompanied by someone with appropriate membership level. Would you like information about upgrading your family account? I declined the upgrade information but couldn't stop thinking about the implications of what I'd learned. Kevin was spending 45 minutes in areas of Meridian Fitness Center that required premium membership he didn't possess. Someone else was facilitating his access to private facilities. Someone with the authority and financial means to bring guests into executive relaxation areas designed for activities that required privacy and discretion. My phone buzzed with another notification as Kevin's gym session concluded. 12:38 p.m. Activity complete. Heart rate returning to baseline. GPS showing movement toward the parking lot. But instead of driving back to TechFlow's office for afternoon meetings, Kevin's location tracker revealed he was heading in a completely different direction. The blue dot moved east through downtown Riverside, then north on arterial streets that led toward residential neighborhoods I'd never had reason to visit. Kevin's destination became clear as his GPS stopped moving at 12:54 p.m. He'd arrived at a small shopping center anchored by a pharmacy, a nail salon, and a restaurant called Cafe Luna that I'd never heard of despite living in Riverside for 6 years. According to Kevin's smartwatch, he remained at this location for 37 minutes, his heart rate gradually stabilizing at normal resting levels. The activity tracker classified this period as sedentary, suggesting he was sitting rather than engaging in physical activity. Perhaps he was grabbing lunch after his gym session, though Cafe Luna seemed like an oddly specific choice for someone who usually ate at chain restaurants near his office. When Kevin's GPS began moving again at 1:31 p.m., I expected him to return to TechFlow for afternoon work. Instead, his route led back toward Corona Hills and the mysterious residential address on Meadowbrook Lane where he'd spent yesterday's lunch hour. This time, however, Kevin's stay was brief, only 22 minutes, and his heart rate remained at resting levels throughout the visit. By 2:45 p.m., Kevin was finally back at his office, his smartwatch indicating the calm, steady cardiovascular rhythm of someone settling into routine afternoon responsibility. According to his biometric data, the rest of his workday proceeded normally, with no unusual heart rate elevations or unexpected location changes. But the morning's activities had revealed a level of complexity in Kevin's secret life that went far beyond simple adultery. He wasn't just visiting a lover's house twice a week. He was maintaining relationships that provided access to premium gym facilities, frequenting restaurants I'd never heard of, conducting activities that required careful timing and coordination between multiple locations. This was the behavior of someone living a completely parallel existence, with its own social networks, favorite establishments, and routine patterns that existed entirely separate from the life he shared with me and our children. Kevin hadn't just found someone else to sleep with, he'd constructed an alternative identity that had its own geography, its own schedule, and its own community of people who apparently knew him in ways I was only beginning to discover. That evening, Kevin returned home with a cheerful account of his day that bore no resemblance to the activities his smartwatch had documented. He'd spent the morning in client meetings, grabbed a quick workout at lunch, and devoted the afternoon to preparing presentations for next week's sales call. When Sophia asked why he seemed more energetic than usual, Kevin attributed his good mood to the endorphins from his gym session and his excitement about potential new clients. During dinner, I found myself studying not just Kevin's behavior but also his physical appearance for evidence of the day's secret activities. His hair looked freshly styled despite claiming he'd spent lunch hour exercise. His clothes showed no signs of gym activities, no wrinkles or perspiration stains that would indicate recent physical exertion. Even his cologne seemed recently applied, as if he'd refreshed his appearance sometime during the afternoon. "How was your workout?" I asked casually while Kevin helped Tyler cut his chicken into manageable pieces. "Great, actually," Kevin replied enthusiastically. "I'm really getting back into the rhythm of regular exercise. The watch has been motivating me to push harder during cardio sessions." He glanced down at his smartwatch with obvious affection, apparently unaware that the same device he credited with improving his fitness routine was systematically documenting every lie he told about his daily activity. The irony was almost amusing. Kevin was genuinely grateful for technology that was simultaneously enabling and exposing his deception. After the children were in bed, Kevin suggested we watch a movie together, something we hadn't done on a weeknight in months. He chose a romantic comedy from our streaming queue, made popcorn and settled beside me on the couch with the kind of relaxed contentment that suggested he'd had an exceptionally satisfying day. As the opening credits rolled, Kevin wrapped his arm around my shoulders and pulled me closer, his familiar warmth and scent creating the same sense of safety and belonging that had sustained our marriage through 9 years of challenges and changes. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that the smartwatch data was somehow mistaken, that there were innocent explanations for every suspicious location and elevated heart rate I'd discovered. But when Kevin's phone buzzed with a text message during the movie's second act, his reaction destroyed any remaining doubt about the true nature of his daily activities. He glanced at the screen, and his entire demeanor shifted, not dramatically but in ways that only someone who'd lived with him for 9 years would notice. His breathing quickened slightly, his grip on my shoulder tightened almost imperceptibly, and his attention to the movie we were supposed to be enjoying together disappeared entirely. Kevin typed a quick response to the text, then placed his phone face down on the coffee table with studied casual. When I asked who had messaged him so late on a Friday night, he explained it was a client with questions about next week's presentation. Nothing urgent but worth acknowledging promptly. The explanation sounded perfectly reasonable, but Kevin's physiological response told a different story. His heart rate had elevated according to his smartwatch, jumping from resting levels to nearly 100 beats per minute within seconds of receiving the text. His body temperature seemed to increase as well, generating the kind of heat that accompanied emotional arousal rather than casual business communication. More significantly, Kevin's attention remained divided for the rest of the movie, despite his attempts to maintain normal conversation and physical affection. He laughed at the appropriate moments and made comments about the plot, but his responses felt automatic rather than genuinely engaged. Part of his consciousness was clearly focused elsewhere, processing whatever communication he'd received and formulating responses he couldn't share with the wife sitting beside him. When the movie ended and we prepared for bed, Kevin checked his phone one final time before connecting it to the charger on his nightstand. His smartwatch joined the phone, glowing softly in the darkness as it documented his gradually slowing heart rate and eventual transition into sleep. As Kevin's breathing settled into the deep, regular rhythm of unconsciousness, I lay awake beside him, wondering how many other text messages he received that generated similar cardiovascular response, and how long he'd been living this elaborate double life while maintaining the illusion that nothing about our marriage had fundamentally changed. The man sleeping peacefully beside me had spent the morning in premium gym facilities he shouldn't have been able to access, the afternoon at locations he'd never mentioned, and the evening responding to messages that elevated his heart rate while claiming they were routine business communication. Kevin wasn't just having an affair, he was living in a completely different reality while sharing a bed with a wife who was only now beginning to understand the scope of his deception. Part 4. The direct confrontation Saturday morning brought the kind of family chaos that had always been our specialty. Sophia's soccer game at 9 a.m., Tyler's birthday party invitation to consider, grocery shopping that couldn't be postponed another day, and laundry that had reached critical mass in the utility room. Kevin woke up refreshed and energetic, volunteering to make pancakes while I sorted through the week's accumulation of school papers and permission slips that required immediate attention. Our morning routine felt blissfully normal after the week's worth of digital surveillance and growing suspicion. Kevin flipped pancakes while humming off-key. Tyler built elaborate syrup patterns on his plate, and Sophia practiced her soccer moves in the living room until I reminded her that furniture wasn't designed for athletic training. For 90 minutes, we were simply the Martinez family enjoying a weekend morning together, and I almost convinced myself that Kevin's smartwatch data had been somehow misinterpreted or corrupted. That illusion shattered at exactly 10:47 a.m. when Kevin's phone buzzed with a text message that produced the now familiar physiological response I'd learned to recognize. His heart rate spiked according to his smartwatch, his attention immediately shifted away from our family conversation, and his entire demeanor changed in ways that would have been invisible to anyone who hadn't spent the past week studying his behavioral pattern. Kevin read the message quickly, typed a brief response, then announced that he needed to run errands before Sophia's soccer game. TechFlow's quarterly reports were due Monday morning, and he'd forgotten to pick up printing supplies from the office store. Would take an hour at most, he promised, and he'd meet us at the soccer field by 11:30. The explanation sounded reasonable, but every detail felt carefully constructed to provide cover for activities that had nothing to do with quarterly reports or printing supplies. More troubling was Kevin's suggestion that I should take both kids to the soccer game while he handled his errands separately. Our usual routine involved attending Sophia's games together as a family, with Kevin taking photos while I managed Tyler's tendency to wander toward more interesting activities like collecting rocks or chasing butterflies. Actually, I said, maintaining the casual tone that had served me well all week, why don't I come with you? Sandra can take the kids to the soccer game, and we can run errands together. We never get time alone anymore. Kevin's reaction was immediate and telling. His heart rate elevated further, his smile became strained, and he quickly generated a series of reasons why my company would be inconvenient. The office store would be crowded on Saturday morning. His errands would be boring and tedious. I should enjoy the soccer game instead of wasting time on mundane business tasks, but I'd already made up my mind. After a week of digital surveillance and mounting evidence, I needed to understand exactly what Kevin was doing during his mysterious absences from family life. More importantly, I needed to give him an opportunity to tell me the truth voluntarily before I confronted him with the smartwatch data that contradicted nearly every explanation he'd provided about his recent activities. I insist, I replied firmly. Sandra loves taking the kids to soccer games, and I'd rather spend time with my husband than watch 7-year-olds chase a ball around a field. Kevin's discomfort was obvious now, though he continued attempting to dissuade me from joining his errand. Perhaps we could run errands together tomorrow instead. Perhaps I should stay home and work on my graphic design projects while he handled the boring office supply shopping. Perhaps we could meet for lunch after his errands and Sophia's soccer game concluded. But I'd already texted Sandra, who agreed to take both kids to the soccer game and stay with them until we arrived. Sandra understood the significance of my request without requiring detailed explanations. She'd been encouraging me all week to take a more direct approach to investigating Kevin's suspicious behavior. 30 minutes later,
Kevin and I were driving through downtown Riverside in his Honda Accord, his smartwatch documenting the elevated heart rate and increased stress levels that suggested he was deeply uncomfortable with my unexpected companionship. I'd suggested taking my RAV4 instead, but Kevin insisted his car had better air conditioning for the warm Saturday morning. What Kevin didn't know was that I'd placed a small recording app on my phone tucked discreetly in my purse and set to capture our entire conversation. Whatever happened during the next few hours would be documented not just by his smartwatch's biometric data, but also by audio recordings that would preserve every word, every explanation, and every lie he might tell when confronted with activities he believed I knew nothing about. Our first stop was indeed an office supply store where Kevin purchased items that seemed legitimately related to preparing quarterly reports: printer paper, toner cartridges, file folders, and highlighters. He moved through the store efficiently, apparently familiar with the layout and inventory, suggesting this wasn't just an elaborate cover story constructed to explain his Saturday morning absence. But after loading the supplies into his trunk, Kevin suggested making one additional stop before returning to the soccer field. A colleague from TechFlow had recommended a new restaurant for lunch meetings with clients, and Kevin wanted to check out their menu and atmosphere before scheduling important business meals there. The restaurant was Cafe Luna, the same establishment where Kevin's smartwatch had recorded him spending 37 minutes the previous afternoon. According to the GPS coordinates, this was where he'd gone after his mysterious gym session and before his brief visit to the Corona Hills house. Now he was suggesting we visit together as if it were a completely new discovery rather than a location he'd apparently frequented recently. "What kind of restaurant is it?" I asked as Kevin drove toward the shopping center where Cafe Luna was located. "Italian, I think, or maybe Mediterranean." Garcia from the Phoenix office said their lunch menu was impressive, good for entertaining potential clients who want something more upscale than chain restaurants. Kevin's explanation included specific details about who had recommended the restaurant and why it might be useful for business purposes, but his heart rate remained elevated throughout his description. According to his smartwatch, he was experiencing the kind of physiological stress associated with significant anxiety or deception. Cafe Luna occupied a corner unit in a small shopping center that catered to upscale clientele rather than families with young children. The exterior featured floor-to-ceiling windows, elegant signage, and outdoor seating areas with market umbrellas and potted plants. Through the windows I could see intimate tables for two, soft lighting and decor that suggested romantic dining rather than business lunch. "This looks expensive," I commented as Kevin parked near the restaurant's entrance. "Yeah, probably not somewhere we'd bring the kids," he agreed quickly, but Garcia said their clients were impressed by the atmosphere and service quality. We entered Cafe Luna together and I immediately understood why Kevin's heart rate was spiking according to his smartwatch. The hostess greeted him by name, asking whether he'd prefer his usual table near the window or something different since he had a guest today. Her familiarity with Kevin's preferences suggested he'd been here multiple times recently, contradicting his claim that this was an exploratory visit based on a colleague's recommendation. Kevin's face flushed as he realized his regular patron status had been revealed, but he recovered quickly by explaining to the hostess that he'd actually been here once before for a quick lunch meeting and apparently made a good impression. The hostess smiled politely and showed us to a quiet corner table that offered privacy for conversation while providing clear views of the restaurant's other patrons. As we settled into our seats and reviewed the menu, I studied the other customers and began to understand the true nature of Cafe Luna's clientele. Nearly every table was occupied by couples rather than business associates, men and women engaged in intimate conversations rather than professional discussions. The atmosphere was romantic rather than corporate, designed for private rendezvous rather than client entertainment. "This doesn't look like a business lunch kind of place," I observed casually while Kevin pretended to study the wine list. "No, you're right," he agreed, his smartwatch continuing to document elevated stress levels. "Garcia must have been thinking of somewhere else. This is definitely more of a date night restaurant." But even as Kevin dismissed Cafe Luna as unsuitable for business purposes, his behavior suggested deep familiarity with the establishment. He knew which tables offered the best privacy, understood the restaurant's reservation policies, and seemed comfortable navigating their extensive wine selection. When our server approached, Kevin automatically requested sparkling water with lime, apparently his standard beverage choice during previous visits. During lunch, I decided to test Kevin's honesty more directly by asking about his recent work schedule and the increased travel that had been disrupting our family routines. How were the new clients he'd mentioned? What kinds of software solutions was TechFlow promoting in their expanded market? Why did his meetings seem to require so much additional time compared to his previous workload? Kevin's responses included impressive detail about fictional client companies, imaginary software implementations, and elaborate challenges that supposedly explained his frequent absences from home. He described complex negotiations with demanding executives, software customization requirements that necessitated multiple follow-up meetings, and industry competitions that required TechFlow to provide exceptional customer service to maintain their market position. But his smartwatch told a different story. Throughout Kevin's detailed explanations of his professional responsibilities, his heart rate remained between 120 and 140 beats per minute, levels consistent with significant anxiety or active deception. His body temperature seemed elevated as well, generating perspiration despite the restaurant's comfortable air conditioning. More significantly, Kevin's responses included specific references to companies and software products that I knew didn't exist. TechFlow's client roster had been a frequent topic of dinner conversation throughout our marriage, and Kevin had always been proud to discuss the major accounts he managed and the technological solutions his team provided. But the companies he was describing during lunch at Café Luna were entirely fictional, elaborate fabrications designed to explain time that had actually been spent on activities he couldn't acknowledge. When I asked about his recent client meeting with Meridian Technologies, a company I'd invented to test his honesty, Kevin didn't hesitate to provide detailed information about their software needs and implementation timeline. He described meeting with their executive team, touring their facilities, and developing customized solutions that would revolutionize their data management system. His fictional account was compelling and comprehensive, delivered with the confident enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believed his own story. But Meridian Technologies didn't exist, and Kevin's willingness to construct elaborate lies about fictional clients revealed the depth of his commitment to maintaining his deceptive lifestyle. He wasn't just hiding an affair or making excuses for occasional absences from family responsibility. He was living in a completely alternative reality, where every aspect of his professional life had been reimagined to provide cover for activities that required systematic dishonesty. As we finished lunch and prepared to leave Café Luna, I decided to escalate my investigation by suggesting we drive past some of the client locations Kevin had mentioned during our conversation. Since we were already downtown and had time before Sophia's soccer game ended, wouldn't it be interesting to see the offices where Kevin spent so much of his professional energy? Kevin's physiological response was immediate and dramatic. His heart rate spiked to over 150 beats per minute according to his smartwatch, and his face went pale despite the warm afternoon sunshine streaming through the restaurant's window. He quickly generated reasons why touring client offices would be inappropriate: security concerns, weekend closures, confidentiality agreements that restricted unauthorized visits. "Actually," I said while Kevin fumbled for his car keys, "I'd love to see where you've been spending so much time lately. Maybe we could drive past TechFlow's office too, since I haven't seen your workplace in months." This suggestion produced an even more intense physiological response.
Kevin's smartwatch documented heart rate levels approaching 160 beats per minute, the kind of cardiovascular stress associated with panic attacks or extreme anxiety. His hands were visibly trembling as he started the car, and perspiration had begun forming on his forehead, despite the vehicle's air conditioning. "Let's just head back to the soccer field," Kevin said quickly. "I don't want to miss the end of Sophia's game. And Sandra's probably wondering where we are." But I wasn't ready to end our investigation. We'd spent 90 minutes together, and Kevin's behavior had confirmed that nearly every aspect of his recent professional life was fictional. His familiar relationship with Café Luna, his detailed knowledge of non-existent client companies, his extreme anxiety about visiting locations he claimed to frequent regularly. Everything pointed to systematic deception on a scale that went far beyond simple adultery. As Kevin drove toward Oakwood Elementary's soccer fields, I made a decision that would force him to acknowledge the smartwatch data that had been documenting his secret activities all week. Reaching into my purse, I retrieved my phone and opened the Apex Fit app that had been tracking his every movement and physiological response. "Kevin," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the chaos unfolding in my chest. "I need to ask you about something I discovered this week." His knuckles went white as he gripped the steering wheel, but he managed to maintain casual conversational tone while asking what I wanted to discuss. I began by describing the smartwatch notifications I'd been receiving on my phone, explaining how the accidental data sharing had allowed me to observe patterns in his daily activities that didn't match the schedule he'd been describing at home. Kevin's heart rate continued climbing, according to the real-time data on my phone screen, but he maintained that there had to be some technical malfunction or misunderstanding about the GPS tracking. "The watch has been acting up lately," he said, his voice strained but controlled. "I've been meaning to contact customer service about calibration issues and location error, but when I described specific incidents, the Marina Bay Hotel visits, the Corona Hills house, the premium gym facilities he shouldn't have been able to access." Kevin's explanations became increasingly desperate and contradictory. He claimed the hotel visits were client meetings that had been moved at the last minute. The residential address was a customer's home office where he'd been demonstrating software solutions. The gym sessions were legitimate workouts that he'd simply forgotten to mention during our evening conversation. Each explanation might have been plausible individually, but together they formed a pattern of deception that couldn't be explained by technical malfunctions or innocent miscommunications. More damaging was Kevin's continued physiological response to my question. His smartwatch was documenting stress levels that indicated he was experiencing something closer to a medical emergency than casual conversation about scheduling misunderstandings. "Kevin," I said finally, "I know about the words hung in the air between us like a physical presence, impossible to ignore or minimize." Kevin's reaction was immediate and telling. Not surprise or confusion, but resignation mixed with something that looked almost like relief. His heart rate actually began to decrease according to his smartwatch, as if acknowledging the truth had reduced rather than increased his stress levels. For several long minutes, Kevin drove in silence while his cardiovascular system gradually returned to more normal levels. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weariness that suggested he'd been anticipating this conversation for weeks or months. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "Since Tuesday," I replied honestly, "when your watch showed you at Marina Bay Hotel instead of client meeting." Kevin nodded slowly, apparently processing the implications of being caught through his own digital surveillance, rather than traditional evidence like lipstick stains or unexplained charges on credit card statements. The technology he'd embraced to monitor his fitness goals had systematically documented every lie he'd told and every secret location he'd visited. "I'm sorry," he said finally, though his tone suggested more regret about being discovered than genuine remorse about the betrayal itself. "I never meant for you to find out this way." His apology raised more questions than it answered. How had Kevin intended for me to find out about his affair? Was this a temporary situation he'd planned to end before I discovered it? Or a permanent lifestyle change he'd been working toward gradually? Had he been planning to leave our marriage voluntarily? Or was he content to maintain his double life indefinitely while I remained ignorant of his true activities? "Who is she?" I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded despite the emotional devastation unfolding inside me. Kevin hesitated before answering, apparently debating how much truth he was prepared to reveal now that his secret had been exposed. When he spoke, his voice carried the flat, emotionless tone of someone providing factual information rather than discussing the destruction of his family. "Michelle Parker," he said quietly. "She works at TechFlow in the marketing department. We've been seeing each other since last September. 8 months. Kevin had been conducting a relationship with a colleague for 8 months, while maintaining the fiction that our marriage was solid and our family life was stable. Every evening conversation about his workday, every weekend family activity, every intimate moment we'd shared as husband and wife, had been shadowed by his commitment to someone else. "Is that her house in Corona Hill?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the conviction in Kevin's voice when he'd spoken Michelle's name. Yes, Kevin confirmed. She bought it last year after her promotion to senior marketing coordinator. The casualness of his response suggested that Kevin had been fully integrated into Michelle's life in ways that went far beyond physical attraction. He knew about her career advancement, her real estate decisions, her financial situation well enough to understand how she could afford a house in one of Riverside's most expensive neighborhoods. This wasn't a simple affair based on sexual excitement. It was a complete alternative relationship with its own emotional intimacy and shared future planning. Are you in love with her? I asked, though part of me didn't want to hear the answer. Kevin's silence stretched long enough that I could hear the car's air conditioning cycling on and off, the distant sound of children playing at a playground we were passing, the normal Saturday afternoon sounds of suburban life continuing around us while my marriage dissolved in real time. Yes, he said finally, the single word carrying enough weight to collapse everything I'd believed about our life together. Kevin wasn't just having an affair. He wasn't just satisfying physical desires that had somehow become disconnected from our marriage. He had fallen in love with someone else while maintaining the elaborate fiction that I was still the center of his emotional life. Every kiss goodbye, every expression of love, every moment of physical intimacy we'd shared over the past 8 months had been a performance designed to preserve a domestic stability that no longer reflected his true feelings. Do you love me at all anymore? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer from the clinical way Kevin had been discussing the destruction of our family. Again, Kevin's silence extended longer than any loving husband should need to answer such a fundamental question about his marriage. When he finally responded, his words confirmed what his smartwatch data had been suggesting all week, that he'd been going through the motions of family life while his heart and mind were entirely committed elsewhere. I love who you used to be, he said quietly. I love the mother you are to our children, but I haven't been in love with you for a long time, Lisa. We've been living like roommates who happen to share children and a mortgage. His assessment of our marriage was devastating, not because it was cruel but because it contained enough truth to be recognizable. We had fallen into domestic routines that prioritized efficiency over intimacy, family logistics over romantic connection, but I'd assumed that was a natural evolution of long-term marriage, a comfortable settling into partnership rather than evidence that Kevin was emotionally preparing to replace me with someone who offered the excitement and novelty that our relationship no longer provided. How long have you been planning to leave? I asked, though I was beginning to understand that Kevin's smartwatch hadn't just documented his affair, it had recorded the systematic destruction of our marriage over a period of months. Michelle and I have been talking about it since Christmas, Kevin admitted. We wanted to wait until after Sophia finished 2nd grade, give the kids time to adjust gradually rather than disrupting the middle of the school year. Even Kevin's infidelity had been planned with the same careful consideration he brought to family vacation scheduling and children's extracurricular activity. He and Michelle had developed a timeline for dismantling my marriage that prioritized their comfort and convenience while minimizing the disruption to his secret relationship. They'd been making decisions about my future and my children's lives, while I remained completely unaware that everything I valued was being systematically eliminated. As Kevin pulled into the parking lot at Oakwood Elementary, where Sophia's soccer game was concluding and other families were loading children and equipment into their vehicles, I realized that the confrontation I'd initiated to seek truth and clarity had instead revealed the complete dissolution of everything I'd believed about our life together. Kevin wasn't just having an affair. He was actively planning to replace me and break up our family while maintaining the fiction that he was a devoted husband and father. The man sitting beside me in the car looked exactly like the Kevin Martinez I'd married 9 years ago, but his smartwatch had documented the real-time destruction of our marriage while he'd maintained perfect performance of domestic happiness. Now that the truth was finally exposed, I understood that I wasn't just dealing with infidelity. I was facing the systematic theft of my entire life by someone who'd been planning my replacement while reading bedtime stories to our children. Part 4: The Cruel Revelation. Sophia spotted us immediately as Kevin parked near the soccer field, her grass-stained uniform and enormous smile evidence of a successful game. She ran toward our car with Tyler close behind, both children chattering excitedly about goals scored and friends made while their parents had been destroying their family's foundation 30 minutes away at Cafe Luna. "Mom! Dad! We won 3-2, Sophia announced breathlessly as she climbed into the back seat, and Tyler helped the coach carry equipment and Mrs. Kim brought orange slices for everyone. Tyler nodded enthusiastically while fumbling with his seatbelt, adding his own commentary about the playground adjacent to the soccer field and the interesting rocks he'd collected while Sophia played. Their innocent excitement created a surreal contrast to the devastating conversation Kevin and I had just concluded, highlighting how completely our children remained unaware that their stable, loving family was about to be systematically dismantled. Kevin managed to maintain appropriate parental responses to their stories, asking about specific plays and praising their good behavior while Sandra gathered the soccer equipment from the field. But his smartwatch continued documenting elevated stress levels that suggested he was struggling to reconcile his role as devoted father with the reality of planning to abandon his family for a relationship with Michelle Parker. During the drive home, I found myself studying our children in the rearview mirror and wondering how Kevin could maintain such natural affection for Sophia and Tyler while simultaneously planning to disrupt their lives for his own romantic fulfillment. He'd spoken about waiting until after Sophia finished second grade as if his consideration for their school schedules somehow mitigated the fundamental selfishness of choosing his happiness over their stability. "Can we go to Juppé's tonight?" Tyler asked as we turned into our neighborhood. "I want spaghetti with butter and extra Parmesan cheese." "We went to Juppé's last Sunday," Sophia reminded him patiently. "Sunday nights are for Juppé's, remember?" Kevin glanced at me uncertainly, apparently unsure whether our family traditions would continue now that his secret had been exposed. The question of dinner plans seemed absurdly mundane given the magnitude of what we'd discussed, but it also represented the first of countless decisions we'd need to make about maintaining normalcy for our children while navigating the destruction of our marriage. "Let's order pizza tonight," I suggested, partly because I couldn't bear the thought of sitting through our traditional family dinner while processing Kevin's admission that he'd been planning to leave us since Christmas. "We can have a movie night with popcorn and ice cream." Both children approved this plan enthusiastically, apparently unaware that their mother was desperately trying to create positive family memories before their father's deception became impossible to hide. As we pulled into our driveway and began the routine process of unloading soccer equipment and herding children toward the house, Kevin's smartwatch documented a gradual return to normal heart rate levels that suggested he was relieved to be back in familiar domestic territory, but relief proved temporary. Once Sophia and Tyler were settled in the living room, with cartoons and snacks, Kevin and I retreated to our bedroom for a conversation that would determine how quickly our family's dissolution would proceed. "What happens now?" I asked, sitting on the edge of the bed where we'd shared nearly a decade of intimacy that apparently meant far less to Kevin than I'd understood. "I don't know," Kevin replied honestly, though his tone suggested he'd given considerable thought to this question during his months of planning with Michelle. "I never expected you to find out through the watch deck." His response revealed another layer of his deception. Kevin had been maintaining elaborate plans for ending our marriage while hoping to control the timing and circumstances of that revelation. The smartwatch surveillance had disrupted his careful strategy for managing the transition from our family to his new life with Michelle, forcing premature acknowledgement of secrets he'd intended to reveal on his own schedule. "How were you planning to tell me?" I asked, genuinely curious about the mechanics of family destruction that Kevin and Michelle had been orchestrating since Christmas. Kevin hesitated before answering, apparently debating how much of their planning he was prepared to reveal. When he finally spoke, his words confirmed that my entire life had been the subject of detailed discussion and decision-making by people who'd been systematically working toward my replacement. "Michelle thought it would be easier if I moved out gradually," Kevin explained slowly. "Started staying downtown more often for work, giving you time to adjust to me being around less before we discussed permanent separation." The coldness of this strategy was breathtaking. Kevin and Michelle had developed a plan that would slowly accustom me to his absence, making the eventual end of our marriage seem like a natural progression rather than the calculated abandonment it actually represented. They'd been planning to manipulate my emotional adjustment to serve their convenience, treating my feelings and my children's stability as obstacles to be managed rather than priorities to be protected. What about Sophia and Tyler? Asked, though I suspected that Kevin and Michelle's consideration for our children was limited to minimizing disruption to their own timeline. Kids are resilient, Kevin said, echoing language that sounded like something he'd been told rather than conclusions he'd reached through careful consideration of our children's needs. Lots of families manage co-parenting successfully. His casual dismissal of the trauma that divorce would inflict on 7-year-old Sophia and 5-year-old Tyler revealed how completely Kevin had prioritized his own happiness over every other consideration. He'd apparently convinced himself that ending our marriage was a simple lifestyle adjustment that our children would adapt to without significant emotional damage, rather than acknowledging that he was choosing to destroy the only family they'd ever known. And financial, I pressed, recognizing that Kevin's planning with Michelle had probably addressed every practical aspect of dismantling our shared life. You'd keep the house, Kevin said quickly, as if generous property division somehow compensated for the destruction of our family. Child support, alimony if necessary. I'm not trying to leave you without resources, but his reassurances about financial support raised questions about assets I didn't know existed and income streams that might have been hidden during his months of preparation for leave. Kevin's recent behavior had demonstrated his capacity for systematic deception on a scale I'd never imagined possible. If he'd been lying about his daily activities and emotional commitments for 8 months, what other aspects of our shared life might have been subject to manipulation or concealment? Have you been hiding money? I asked directly, watching Kevin's smartwatch for the cardiovascular responses that had become my most reliable indicator of his honesty. His heart rate spiked immediately, jumping from resting levels to over 120 beats per minute within seconds of my question. The physiological response told me everything I needed to know before Kevin even attempted to answer. I've been saving for Michelle's engagement ring, he admitted quietly, apparently recognizing that his smartwatch had already revealed his deception, and putting aside money for a security deposit on an apartment. Nothing that would affect your access to family funds. But the specific nature of Kevin's admissions suggested more extensive financial planning than simple ring shopping and apartment hunting. Engagement ring purchases and security deposits were relatively minor expenses that wouldn't require months of systematic saving or generate the kind of cardiovascular stress that his smartwatch was documenting. Kevin was hiding something more significant, and his body's involuntary responses were betraying secrets he wasn't prepared to acknowledge voluntarily. How much money are we talking about? I pressed, maintaining the calm tone that had served me well throughout the week's investigation. Kevin's silence stretched long enough for his smartwatch to document sustained elevated heart rate that indicated severe anxiety or active deception. When he finally answered, his voice carried the defeated tone of someone who realized that every aspect of his secret planning was about to be exposed. About $40,000, he said quietly. I opened a separate account last summer when Michelle and I started talking seriously about our future. $40,000 represented a significant portion of our family's annual savings, money that should have been contributing to our children's college funds, our mortgage payments, or emergency reserves for unexpected expense. Instead, Kevin had been systematically diverting family resources to finance his relationship with Michelle while maintaining the fiction that our marriage and our children remained his primary financial priorities. Where did that money come from? I asked, though I suspected the answer would reveal even more extensive deception than I'd already discovered. Bonuses from work, Kevin replied, but his smartwatch indicated continuing stress levels that suggested this explanation was incomplete or false. Sales commissions that I didn't mention because I wanted to surprise you with vacation plans that never materialized. The reference to surprise vacation plans felt like another calculated fiction designed to make Kevin's financial deception seem like misguided romantic gesture rather than systematic theft of family resources. More troubling was his mention of work bonuses and sales commissions that he'd never discussed during our regular conversations about family finances and future planning. Kevin's job at TechFlow had always provided steady income without significant bonus potential,
and his commission structure was modest compared to higher-level sales positions. For him to accumulate $40,000 in undisclosed earnings would have required either dramatic changes in his compensation package or income sources that existed entirely outside his legitimate employment. "I want to see bank statements for that account," I said firmly, recognizing that Kevin's smartwatch would continue documenting his truthfulness as effectively as any polygraph examination. His heart rate spiked again, reaching levels that indicated he was experiencing something closer to panic than normal anxiety about financial disclosure. Kevin's physiological response suggested that the separate bank account contained evidence of activities that went far beyond simple saving for an engagement ring and apartment deposit. "Lisa," Kevin said carefully, his voice carrying a warning tone that I'd never heard directed toward me during our marriage, "I think we should focus on how to handle this situation moving forward rather than examining every detail of the past few months." But his attempt to redirect our conversation away from financial questions only confirmed that money was another area where Kevin's deception extended far beyond what he'd already admitted. His smartwatch was documenting stress levels that indicated major secrets remained undisclosed, and his reluctance to provide banking information suggested activities that would be difficult to explain or justify. "I'm going to find out anyway," I replied quietly. "We have joint access to credit reports, tax documents, and financial records. If you've been hiding money, I'll discover it whether you cooperate or not." Kevin's reaction to this threat was immediate and telling. His smartwatch recorded heart rate levels approaching 160 beats per minute, the kind of cardiovascular response associated with genuine panic or fear of serious consequences. Whatever financial activities Kevin had been conducting during his relationship with Michelle, they apparently involved more than simple marital deception. "There might be some irregularities in how I reported certain income," Kevin said finally, his voice barely audible despite our bedroom's quiet atmosphere. The word irregularities suggested tax fraud, unreported earnings, or other financial crimes that would have legal consequences extending far beyond divorce proceedings. Kevin wasn't just admitting to hidden assets, he was acknowledging activities that could result in criminal charges if discovered by appropriate authorities. "What kind of irregularity?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand that Kevin's betrayal of our marriage was only the most visible aspect of a much larger pattern of deception that encompassed his professional ethics as well as his personal commitment. "Michelle's been helping me understand TechFlow's commission structure better," Kevin explained slowly, apparently trying to minimize the implications of what he was revealing. "There are opportunities to maximize earnings through strategic client relationship management that most sales reps don't fully utilize." His explanation was deliberately vague, but the reference to Michelle's involvement in his earnings strategies suggested that their relationship had professional as well as personal dimension. More concerning was Kevin's use of euphemisms like strategic client relationship management, that could mean anything from aggressive sales techniques to actual fraud or embezzlement. "Are you stealing from TechFlow?" I asked directly, wanting to understand the full scope of legal and financial consequences that Kevin's secret activities might bring to our family. His smartwatch documented another dramatic spike in heart rate, but Kevin's answer suggested that his definition of theft was more flexible than legal authorities might find acceptable. "I'm maximizing legitimate commission opportunities," he said defensively. "Everything I'm doing is technically within company policy guidelines." The word technically suggested that Kevin was operating in legal gray areas that might survive internal company review but wouldn't withstand external scrutiny from tax authorities or financial regulators. His relationship with Michelle had apparently introduced him to earning strategies that were generating significant undisclosed income while creating potential criminal liability for our entire family. As I processed the magnitude of what Kevin was revealing, systematic financial deception, possible tax fraud, undisclosed income sources, professional misconduct, I realized that his affair with Michelle Parker was only the beginning of problems that would affect our children's future in ways I was only starting to understand. The following Monday morning, Kevin left for work with the same routine kiss and coffee mug, but everything had fundamentally changed between us. His smartwatch glowed on his wrist as usual, continuing to document his every movement and physiological response, though now I understood that the device had become my most valuable asset in documenting his ongoing deception rather than a fitness tracker monitoring his health goals. I waited exactly 17 minutes after his Honda Accord disappeared around the corner before implementing the plan I'd developed during a sleepless weekend of research and preparation. My first call was to Rachel Chen, the most aggressive divorce attorney in Riverside, whose reputation for protecting women's financial interest during contentious separations had been recommended by Sandra during our emergency Sunday evening conversation. Rachel's office could see me immediately, she explained, because her Monday morning appointment had canceled unexpectedly. As I drove downtown toward her law firm, Kevin's smartwatch sent its first notification of the day to my phone, confirming that he'd arrived at TechFlow's office at his usual time. But now I knew that his presence at work meant nothing about his actual activities or his commitment to the professional responsibilities he'd been using to justify his frequent absences from family life. Rachel Chen's office occupied the top floor of a sleek building that overlooked Riverside's financial district, with floor-to-ceiling windows that provided commanding views of the city where Kevin had been conducting his secret life for the past 8 months. The attorney herself was exactly what I'd expected: sharp, professional, and completely focused on understanding the scope of deception I'd discovered through digital surveillance.
Smartwatch data is admissible evidence in California divorce proceedings, Rachel explained, as she reviewed the screenshots and GPS coordinates I'd compiled over the past week. This level of documentation is actually more comprehensive than what most private investigators provide, and it's been generated by your husband's own device with his full knowledge and consent. She was particularly interested in the financial irregularities Kevin had admitted during our Saturday confrontation, explaining that undisclosed income and hidden assets could dramatically affect property division and support calculations. If Kevin had been systematically diverting family resources to finance his relationship with Michelle Parker, the court would view that as dissipation of marital assets subject to reimbursement. More concerning, Rachel continued, is his mention of commission irregularities and strategic client relationship management. If your husband has been engaging in fraud or embezzlement, those activities could result in criminal charges that would affect custody arrangements and his ability to provide financial support. Rachel recommended immediately documenting our family's complete financial picture before Kevin realized that legal proceedings were imminent. Bank statements, tax returns, credit card records, investment accounts, insurance policies. Everything needed to be secured and analyzed before Kevin had opportunities to further conceal or dissipate assets he'd been hiding. We also need to understand the scope of his professional misconduct, Rachel explained. If TechFlow discovers that he's been engaging in fraudulent activities, he could face termination and criminal prosecution that would eliminate his income entirely. You need to be prepared for worst-case scenarios where your husband loses his job and faces potential imprisonment. The meeting with Rachel lasted 90 minutes and provided me with a comprehensive strategy for protecting myself and my children from the financial consequences of Kevin's deception. More importantly, it gave me a clear understanding of how Kevin's own smartwatch could be used to document his ongoing activities and provide irrefutable evidence for divorce proceedings. My second appointment was with Detective Amanda Torres from Riverside Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, whose expertise in white-collar investigations had been recommended by Rachel's office. Detective Torres specialized in cases involving corporate fraud, embezzlement, and financial schemes that crossed jurisdictional boundaries, exactly the kind of criminal activity that Kevin's admissions had suggested. Commission fraud is surprisingly common in technology sales, Detective Torres explained as she reviewed my documentation of Kevin's suspicious financial activity. Employees manipulate client relationships, falsify sales records, or redirect commission payments through schemes that can appear legitimate on surface review but constitute theft when examined closely. She was particularly interested in Kevin's relationship with Michelle Parker and her role in helping him understand TechFlow's commission structure. Romantic relationships between colleagues often provided cover for financial crimes, Detective Torres explained, because personal motivations could disguise professional misconduct that might otherwise attract attention from supervisors or compliance departments. If Ms. Parker works in marketing and your husband is in sales, they would have access to client information, commission calculations, and financial records that could be manipulated for personal benefit. Detective Torres continued, their affair provides emotional motivation for criminal activity, while their professional relationship provides opportunity and access. Detective Torres recommended that I continue monitoring Kevin's smartwatch data while she initiated a preliminary investigation into his activities at TechFlow. If the evidence supported criminal charges, the police investigation would proceed independently of divorce proceedings while providing additional documentation that could benefit my civil case. Keep detailed records of everything, Detective Torres advised. GPS locations, heart rate patterns, financial transactions, conversations where he admits to irregularities. Your husband's own smartwatch is creating a comprehensive record of his criminal activities that will be invaluable if this case goes to trial. By Tuesday afternoon, I had established relationships with legal and law enforcement professionals who understood the scope of Kevin's deception and were prepared to help me document his ongoing activity. More importantly, I had developed a systematic approach to using his own technology against him while maintaining the appearance of normal family life until I was ready to reveal the evidence I'd been accumulating. Kevin's smartwatch data from Tuesday followed the familiar pattern I'd discovered the previous week. Marina Bay Hotel from 2:15 until 4:20 p.m., elevated heart rate consistent with intense physical activity, GPS coordinates that never varied by more than a few feet within the hotel's structure. But now I understood that this wasn't just evidence of adultery. It was documentation of time that Kevin was stealing from his legitimate work responsibilities while potentially engaging in financial crimes that could destroy our family's security. That evening, Kevin returned home with cheerful stories about client meetings and sales presentations that I now knew were complete fabrication. His enthusiasm for fictional business successes felt obscene given what I'd learned about his actual activities, but I maintained appropriate responses while his smartwatch continued documenting the cardiovascular stress he experienced whenever I asked specific questions about his workday. How's the Meridian Technologies account developing? I asked during dinner, referring to the fictional client I'd invented during our previous conversation. Kevin's heart rate spiked immediately according to his smartwatch, jumping from resting levels to over 130 beats per minute as he realized I was testing his commitment to lies he'd told during our confrontation at Café Luna. But he didn't hesitate to elaborate on the fictional account, providing additional details about imaginary software needs and implementation timelines. They're moving forward with the full integration package, Kevin explained enthusiastic. Should be one of my biggest commissions this quarter if the contract finalizes before month end. His willingness to construct increasingly elaborate lies about non-existent clients revealed how completely Kevin had divorced himself from reality during his relationship with Michelle. He wasn't just hiding an affair, he was living in an alternative universe where every aspect of his professional life had been reimagined to support activities that were potentially criminal as well as personally destructive. Wednesday brought a breakthrough in my investigation when Detective Torres called with preliminary findings from her inquiry into Kevin's activities at TechFlow. The company's internal records showed discrepancies in commission payments and client relationship management that supported my suspicions about financial misconduct. Your husband has been receiving commission payments for accounts that don't exist in TechFlow's official client database, Detective Torres explained. Either he's creating fictional sales records to generate fraudulent income, or he's diverting legitimate commission payments through accounting irregularities that constitute embezzlement. More concerning was the discovery that Michelle Parker had access to financial systems that would allow her to manipulate commission calculations and client records. Her position in marketing provided her with authority to modify customer information and payment processing that could facilitate fraud without immediate detection by supervisory personnel. We're requesting a full audit of accounts managed by your husband and Parker, Detective Torres continued. If our suspicions are correct, they've been running a systematic fraud scheme that could involve hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen commission payments and fictitious sales records. The scope of Kevin's criminal activities was far more extensive than I'd imagined when I'd first discovered his elevated heart rate at Marina Bay Hotel. He wasn't just having an affair and hiding money, he was potentially facing federal charges for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy that could result in years of imprisonment and complete financial devastation for our family. Thursday's smartwatch data showed Kevin following his usual pattern of hotel visits and elevated cardiovascular activity. But now I understood that each notification represented evidence of ongoing criminal behavior as well as marital betrayal. His heart rate spikes weren't just documenting physical intimacy with Michelle Parker. They were recording the physiological stress of maintaining elaborate criminal schemes that required constant vigilance and coordination. That afternoon, Rachel Chen called with updates from the forensic accountant she'd hired to analyze our family's financial record. The investigation had revealed multiple hidden accounts, unreported income sources, and asset transfers that painted a comprehensive picture of Kevin's financial deception over the past 18 months. Your husband has been systematically moving money out of your joint accounts into investment vehicles that are titled solely in his name, Rachel explained. The total amount exceeds $80,000, including funds that should have been contributing to your children's college savings and your family's retirement planning. More troubling was the discovery that Kevin had been using our family's credit and financial information to secure loans and credit lines that were funding his relationship with Michelle while creating debt obligations that would affect my financial stability after divorce proceedings concluded. He's been living a completely separate financial life, Rachel continued. Credit cards you don't know about, investment accounts that aren't disclosed on tax returns, income sources that are being hidden from both you and the Internal Revenue Service. This is systematic financial fraud that goes far beyond typical marital deception. The forensic analysis also revealed that Kevin had been preparing for divorce much longer than he'd admitted during our Saturday confrontation. Evidence suggested that he'd been moving assets and manipulating family finances since early the previous year. Nearly a full year before he claimed his relationship with Michelle had become serious. Your husband has been planning to leave your marriage for at least 15 months. Rachel explained. Everything he's done during that time, the hidden accounts, the asset transfers, the financial crimes, has been designed to position himself for divorce while leaving you and your children with minimum resources and maximum debt obligation. Friday morning brought the culmination of my week-long investigation when Detective Torres arrived at our house with a search warrant for Kevin's electronics, financial records, and personal belongings. The police investigation had developed sufficient evidence to support criminal charges, and Kevin's arrest was scheduled for that afternoon when he returned from his final visit to Marina Bay Hotel. We'll coordinate the arrest with your divorce attorney's filing of preliminary papers, Detective Torres explained. Your husband will be served with both criminal charges and divorce documents simultaneously, preventing him from taking any additional steps to hide assets or destroy evidence. I spent the morning removing Sophia and Tyler from the house, arranging for them to spend the afternoon and evening with Sandra while Kevin's arrest proceeded without traumatizing them with the sight of their father being taken into custody. My children still had no understanding that their stable, loving family was about to be completely destroyed by their father's criminal activities and systematic betrayal. At exactly 2:37 p.m., Kevin's smartwatch sent its final notification to my phone, documenting his arrival at Marina Bay Hotel for what would be his last secret meeting with Michelle Parker. His heart rate was already elevated as he entered the building, but I knew that within hours he would be experiencing cardiovascular stress levels that had nothing to do with romantic excitement. Detective Torres and her team arrested Kevin in the hotel lobby at 4:15 p.m. just as his smartwatch recorded his completion of another 90-minute session of intense physical activity. The device that had enabled me to discover his deception continued documenting his vital signs as police officers read him his rights and explained the federal charges he would be facing for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Michelle Parker was arrested simultaneously at her TechFlow office, where investigators discovered extensive evidence of the systematic fraud scheme she and Kevin had been operating for over a year. Her access to marketing databases and financial systems had allowed them to create fictional client accounts, manipulate commission payments, and redirect company funds into personal accounts that had financed their relationship while defrauding both TechFlow and federal tax authorities. The forensic investigation eventually revealed that Kevin and Michelle had stolen nearly $200,000 through their elaborate scheme, money that would need to be repaid to TechFlow while Kevin faced federal prosecution that could result in up to 15 years in prison. The financial restitution requirements meant that our family's assets would be completely depleted while I struggled to rebuild my children's security from nothing. But the most satisfying aspect of Kevin's destruction was that his own smartwatch had provided the initial evidence that exposed his entire criminal enterprise. The device he'd been so proud of, the technology he'd credited with improving his fitness and motivating his health goals, had systematically documented every lie he'd told and every crime he'd committed while maintaining the fiction that he was a devoted husband and father. 6 months later, as Kevin awaited trial from federal custody and I rebuilt my life as a single mother with the help of victim compensation funds, I received a final notification from his smartwatch. The device had been returned to me as part of the evidence collection process, and its memory still contained months of data documenting the systematic destruction of our family. But instead of deleting the records of Kevin's betrayal, I preserved every screenshot, every GPS coordinate, and every heart rate pattern that had revealed his true nature. The smartwatch data had become more than evidence of infidelity. It was proof that technology doesn't lie even when the people wearing it have completely abandoned honesty in every other aspect of their lives. Kevin had bought the Apex Fit Pro to monitor his health and improve his fitness routine. Instead, it became the instrument of his complete destruction, documenting every moment of his criminal activities while he believed his secrets were safely hidden from the wife who was using his own technology to expose the truth he thought would remain buried forever. The man who had spent months planning to replace me and abandon our children was now facing 15 years in federal prison, financial ruin, and the complete destruction of his professional reputation. His relationship with Michelle Parker had ended the moment their arrests were announced, leaving him with nothing except the consequences of crimes that his own smartwatch had helped document with digital precision. As for me, I learned that sometimes the most powerful weapon against deception is simply paying attention to the data that liars create when they think no one is watching. Kevin's smartwatch hadn't just revealed his affair, it had exposed his entire false identity and provided the evidence needed to protect my children from a father who had been willing to sacrifice their stability for his own selfish desire. The technology he'd embraced to track his fitness goals had ultimately tracked his descent into criminality, documenting every heartbeat of his betrayal until the truth could no longer be hidden or denied. 3 weeks after discovering Kevin's double life through his own smartwatch, I was sitting across from Detective Amanda Torres as she spread arrest warrants across her desk like playing cards. The evidence we'd gathered was overwhelming: GPS coordinates, heart rate data, financial records, and recorded conversations that painted a complete picture of systematic fraud that went far beyond simple adultery. Your husband's smartwatch created a digital trail that most criminals spend years trying to avoid, Detective Torres explained as she reviewed the timeline we'd constructed. Every lie he told you, every secret meeting with Michelle Parker, every fraudulent transaction. It's all documented with timestamps and biometric data that can't be disputed in court. The investigation had revealed that Kevin and Michelle weren't just having an affair. They'd been operating a sophisticated embezzlement scheme through TechFlow's commission system, creating phantom clients and redirecting payments into personal accounts that had funded their relationship for over a year. The total theft exceeded $300,000, money that would need to be repaid while Kevin faced federal prosecution. "We'll arrest him this afternoon," Detective Torres continued. "Michelle Parker will be taken into custody simultaneously at TechFlow's office. Both of them are looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy charges." As I drove home to prepare for Kevin's final day of freedom, his smartwatch sent another notification to my phone. He was at Marina Bay Hotel again, his heart rate elevated to familiar levels that I now understood represented far more than physical intimacy. Those cardiovascular spikes documented criminal meetings where he and Michelle planned their next fraudulent transactions while believing their activities remained hidden from investigation. Kevin returned home that evening with stories about successful client presentations and promising sales prospects, lies that felt obscene given what I knew about his actual activities. His enthusiasm for fictional business achievements made me realize how completely he'd disconnected from reality during his criminal partnership with Michelle Parker. "The Meridian Technologies deal is finally moving forward," Kevin announced during dinner, referring to the non-existent client I'd invented to test his honesty. "Should close next week for a substantial commission."
His willingness to elaborate on completely fictional business achievements while federal investigators prepared arrest warrants demonstrated the depth of his self-deception. Kevin had convinced himself that his criminal activities were legitimate business strategies, that his systematic theft from TechFlow was simply aggressive sales tactics, that his colleagues were too timid to attempt. But his smartwatch told a different story. Throughout dinner, Kevin's heart rate remained elevated at levels consistent with extreme anxiety or guilt. His body understood the precarious situation he'd created even if his conscious mind refused to acknowledge the inevitable consequences of his actions. The next morning brought the culmination of everything his smartwatch had helped me discover. At exactly 2:45 p.m., while Kevin believed he was safely conducting another secret meeting at Marina Bay Hotel, Detective Torres and her team entered the building with arrest warrants and federal marshals. Kevin's smartwatch documented the moment of his capture with clinical precision. His heart rate spiked to over 180 beats per minute as police officers surrounded him in the hotel lobby, explained the charges he was facing, and placed him under arrest for crimes that his own technology had helped expose. Michelle Parker was arrested simultaneously at TechFlow's downtown offices, where investigators discovered computers full of evidence documenting their year-long fraud scheme. Her access to marketing databases and financial systems had enabled systematic theft that might have continued indefinitely if not for the digital surveillance Kevin had unknowingly provided through his fitness tracking obsession. The irony was perfect and absolute. Kevin had purchased his Apex Fit Pro to monitor his health and improve his physical fitness. Instead, the device became the primary instrument of his complete destruction, documenting every criminal act, while he believed his secrets were perfectly concealed from the wife who was using his own technology to expose the truth. 6 months later, as Kevin awaited trial from federal custody and faced the possibility of 2 decades in prison, I received a final notification from his abandoned smartwatch. The device had been returned to me as part of the evidence collection process, its memories still containing months of data that had revealed his systematic betrayal of everything we'd built together. But instead of feeling satisfaction about Kevin's destruction, I felt relief that technology had provided the truth I needed to protect my children from a father who'd been willing to sacrifice their stability for criminal profit. His smartwatch hadn't just exposed his affair, it had documented his complete moral collapse and provided the evidence necessary to ensure he faced appropriate consequence. The man who'd spent months planning to abandon his family for Michelle Parker was now facing financial ruin, professional disgrace, and decades of imprisonment. His relationship with his criminal partner had ended the moment their arrests were announced, leaving him with nothing except the consequences of crimes that his own beloved smartwatch had meticulously documented. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.